Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming and stopping by the Aaliyah Archives. In today's video, I am going over my books for February and what I ended up reading. So let's just get right into it. The first book that I read is called Lonely Crowds by Stephanie Wambagu. And Lonely Crowds unpacks the upbringing of two Black women artists who meet in Catholic school, where they form a volatile, oftentimes toxic friendship before they move to New York City to pursue their artistry. It follows Ruth, a Kenyan American girl who comes from an emotionally detached family, and Maria, an Afro Panamanian girl who loses her mother to suicide before she lives with her aunt, who also deals with severe paranoia and depression. The story is told from Ruth's perspective, and she finds herself drawn to Maria, and they form an intense bond where Maria is able to explore her sexuality, pursue her art, and develop her identity, while Ruth blindly follows her, often neglecting her own interests and desires. The novel follows Ruth and Maria through their time in Catholic school and throughout college until they find themselves in New York City in the mid 90s. I have a strong connection to New York City as I have spent a few years there. So I was intrigued by the setting and the premise of the novel. However, it didn't feel like this book was set in New York City at all. There were no cultural references to it, and it was hard to connect to the environments the characters were in. Ultimately, for a novel about artists, I was expecting this story to be more colorful and vibrant. Instead, I felt very far removed from the characters and the writing style as well. Wambagu's prose lacks impactful affect and emotional depth, and her simple sentence structure really limit the descriptive meaning of her words. I think this was partly intentional because of Ruth's emotional detachment to herself and those around her. I think Ruth is a character who acknowledges she is unhappy, yet she does not take any responsibility or action to change her life circumstances. This felt, while frustrating, this felt very realistic, and it also makes it difficult to connect with Ruth as a person. On the contrast, Maria is intelligent and dedicated to her photography and filmmaking, but I found her to be highly manipulative and untrustworthy, which made me interested in why Ruth continually gravitates towards her throughout the novel. There were a few emotionally charged moments throughout the novel that were simply summarized and never referenced to again. This made it difficult to understand how these events emotionally impacted Ruth, which also made me question why they were included in the narrative to begin with. Finally, I thought Wambagu's depiction of the character's mental health challenges was the most impactful thing about this novel. Ruth's mother is both emotionally unavailable and abusive, in part because that is her nature, but also reminiscent of many immigrant children's relationships with their parents, who often have to work two, three, four times as hard as United States citizens to make ends meet. And so I also found that Maria's backstory, while disjointed at times, is pretty heartbreaking. And I saw the direct impacts it had on her capacity to connect with other people meaningfully. And while this was not the most profound read or the most emotionally captivating, I was still able to relate to it. It captured the harsh realities of being a Black woman in creative spaces, in academia, understood what it felt like to navigate understanding your culture and how it often conflicts with American culture, and how that conflict influences your purpose and identity. Moving on to my next read, Cronus by P. Djeli Clark wrote a short dystopian novel set in 2030 where society is legally racially segregated and governed by rigid, oppressive hierarchy. The protagonist, Annabeth, is a young Black woman who works as a receptionist for a company named Cronus, and they offer high end time travel tourism. Cronus caters exclusively to wealthy, primarily white oligarchs who travel back in time for leisure. Annabeth's daily life is this constant grind of dealing with microaggressions and keeping her head down to survive her hostile reality. Also, within this world, a mysterious condition called false memory psychosis is spreading among Black people. And those affected by false memory psychosis claim to remember a different world, one where Black history is full of achievement and where segregation doesn't exist. The government dismisses these ideas as delusions or mental illness. Throughout our time with Annabeth, she begins to experience false memory psychosis and these, what they call visions, herself. She eventually discovers that they aren't hallucinations, but are instead actual memories of the original timeline that you and I live in. While she uncovers this secret, she also discovers that her employer, Cronus, has been using various technology and AI to systematically alter the past. And by deleting Black historical figures and their achievements, the company and the elites who fund the company are ravaging the true history of Black people specifically to manufacture the segregated world that Annabeth still lives in. This book was profound. It was less than 50 pages, so I was able to read it in about an hour. Yet the characters were punchy, they had good motivation to understand the world that they were living in, and I really was profoundly impacted by this story. I think one of the most important themes of this book was about revising history and the harm that that can cause. This is very reminiscent of what is happening in the United States and across the world right now, and how our current political system is attempting to negate, discredit, and destroy Black American livelihoods for political gain and economic hegemony. I think the most important lesson that I learned from this book is it's important for Black people and other marginalized groups to preserve our own history, whether that be through writing, oral tradition, to ensure that our positive, inspiring truths and also the devastating history that our ancestors had to go through is maintained throughout generations. I thought that book was truly impactful, just as I find most of Clark's work to be, and I would highly recommend it. Next up is Judith Butler's Gender Trouble. Butler argues that gender is not an internal or biological truth, but is instead a manufactured identity created by a set of sustained actions enforced via social gender norms. This book really challenged me. I read it for a class, but it was also something that I've been meaning to read for quite a while now. Butler describes the physical body as a passive medium. Basically, our bodies are blank slates that society writes its rules on, and we have to abide by those rules. I have some major thoughts on this premise, but also just coming from a psychology and yoga background, I believe the mind, body, and spirit are an integrated unit, not just a canvas for social regulation. And what I mean by that is, I think Butler uses Western dualism and other Western theories to promote how gender is a performance. And while I think her argument is impactful and interesting, I think it really ignores and overlooks the biological and neurological foundations of our lived experiences, especially when those experiences come from gender based trauma and violence. That said, I think for anyone who is interested in understanding gender, what gender is, and how gender is influenced by culture, I would recommend this book for you. And also anyone who's interested in foundational feminist theory. Butler reframes gender norms as a reaction to a rigid, oftentimes heteronormative system. It's dense, it's highly philosophical, but this view of gender as a performance has reframed my thinking about gender significantly. I have so much more to say about Butler's work, so I'm actually recording a separate dedicated video to gender trouble where I really dive into the concepts and themes, so please be on the lookout for that. Those were the three books that I read this month, but I also read a few essays and things that I would love to discuss and talk about. Those essays being The Power of the Erotic by Audre Lorde. This speech, delivered by Audre Lorde, a Black feminist theorist, scholar, and academic, taught me a very personal lesson about what beauty and sensuality mean to me. And Lord talks about the erotic as a profound spiritual and creative source of power within women, primarily, that fuels change, joy, and connection. It The erotic is meant to challenge patriarchal systems that have distorted and suppressed them. The essay argues that reclaiming this power of the erotic through deep feeling and shared experiences within community, whether it be in art or in work or in relationships, is essential for our personal and political liberation. It Not only that, but the erotic can also provide the energy to pursue genuine change rather than accept or settling for superficiality. It made me reflect on the forces that attempt to take my power away, how I can reject those forces, and also how I can use my power to make impactful change around me. I would recommend reading this if you are feeling overwhelmed and disheartened by what's happening politically right now, or if you are trying to find your way in the world, find more connection to your art and yourself. I think sitting with these themes and really reflecting on what eroticism is beyond a sexual frame of view and more beyond how we as humans have the power to create our reality, I think would be very impactful. And Audre Lorde in general is such a wonderful writer, and I would recommend most of what she has written. Finally, this month I have been immersed in the work of Dr. Linda James Myers, who is a Black psychologist who developed the optimal conceptual theory. I'm using this as a theoretical framework for my thesis and additional research that I'm doing in my doctoral program. And so I figured I would share a little bit of it with you all. Myers argues that most of us are trapped in a suboptimal worldview. And this is a way of thinking categorized by objectification, so making people feel used or seeing people as objects to be used and managed. External validation, believing our sense of worth comes from the external forces of work, your looks, or your status in society. Fragmentation, so separating the mind from the body and the individual from the community. And as a result of these three things, this worldview creates a scarcity mindset, which leads to competition, oppression, and deep internal anxiety. This is highly reminiscent of the capitalistic structures that we currently live under in America specifically. Myers argues that this way of life is suboptimal or not normal, and it really draws us away from our inherent roots as people. She develops a sense of what an optimal worldview is, which is rooted in ancient Afrocentric philosophy and wisdom. It assumes that the universe is a unified being, and everything in the universe, whether living or non living, is connected in some way. And there are 6 different tenets that make up this optimal worldview that I will go over briefly because I just find it to be very fascinating. One, the spirituality and spiritual development are very central to this theory. And in an optimal view, the spirit and the body and the mind are not separate. Your physical essence and your spiritual essence are one. And when you develop spiritually as a person, you aren't leaving the world behind you. You're learning to move through the world with a spiritual grounding. The second tenet is self knowledge. Myers teaches that self knowledge is the basis of all learning, and you cannot truly understand the world until you understand who you are and your position in it. This self knowledge is intrinsically linked with the third tenet of inherent self worth. And inherent self worth means that your value is non negotiable. We do not earn our value through work or through obtaining certain material possessions. We are inherently valuable because we are alive and because we are connected to the universe. I think this is one of the most profound tenets to me because a lot of the time, self worth, our relationship to self worth, is often defined by our actions and how other people perceive us. And these individualistic capitalist roots that we live under and need to live under in order to survive under this system are highly problematic because then we start to feel worthless. And a lot of our insecurities that we develop are rooted in oppression. And so Myers is arguing that we are all inherently valuable, no matter who we are, and that we should praise ourselves for simply being here and being alive. Fourth tenet is extended self identity and community. So, so Myers goes beyond individualism and leans more into collectivism. And we are connected to not only the people who are living among us currently, but we're connected to our ancestors in the past and the future people who are yet to be born. The fifth tenet is diunital logic, which is essentially both and thinking. There can be two truths at the same time, or there can be multiple truths at the same time. In our current culture, we live in a very either or society, a society of opposites. Diunital logic acknowledges that there are opposite truths and they exist at the same time. This is a work in progress because we are told in our current worldview that there is one objective truth, which the hard sciences are the objective truth, and anything that goes beyond our current levels of understanding must not be true. Diunital logic says that that is an outdated way of thinking, and we should be able and we can acknowledge that there are multiple explanations for things that happen in our natural and also spiritual world. Finally, the sixth tenet is a holistic worldview. And this is a big picture realization that posits everything in your life, from your internal emotions and physical health to your relationships to your spirit, is interconnected. And you can't do one thing without influencing everything else around you. Really am enjoying this theory because it's something that I have been thinking about all of the time and been questioning about, where do our cultural ideals come from? And they come from a individualistic Western type of thinking. Having a theory or having a way of life that I truly connect to is very important. And I really am invested in learning more about optimal conceptual theory. And I hope you all learn something about it too. With that, those are all of the books, musings, and essays that I have came across this month. Please be on the lookout of my gender trouble video. And while you're at it, if you could like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, it really helps a lot. And I also have an Instagram linked in the description below. Thank you all so much, and until next time.